My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, or was. Now I am just a loose end, a witness to something that should never have been disturbed. We called it the Herald experiment. We thought we could control it, predict the future. We wanted to create an omen. Instead, we became one. It is out there now, and it is warning you about what we have done. Listen to me. Your life, everyone's life, may depend on it. Before the alarms, before the screams, before this, I was just another academic seeking tenure. Dr. Eris Thorne, a theoretical physicist specializing in quantum entanglement and probability mechanics. My work was niche, underfunded, usually relegated to obscure journals. I dreamed of a breakthrough, of course. What scientist doesn't? But I never imagined it would arrive in the form of a cryptic email embossed with an unfamiliar emblem. The email was an invitation, vague but enticing. It spoke of a privately funded research initiative with unlimited resources dedicated to exploring the fundamental nature of causality and precognitive phenomena. It mentioned my published papers, even the ones I thought no one had read. It was flattering and deeply intriguing. The sender was a Dr. Alastair Finch, a name I didn't recognize, but the institute he represented, Project Chimera, had no digital footprint, no website, no public records. That should have been the first warning sign. But the promise of unlimited resources and the chance to work on something truly groundbreaking, it was too tempting. The interview was unconventional. A video call, encrypted, with Dr. Finch appearing only as a shadowy figure. His voice, however, was hypnotic, soft, articulate, full of a quiet, fervent passion. He spoke of peering beyond the veil of time, of understanding the whispers of fate. He didn't talk about what they were doing exactly, just the grand philosophical implications. He made it sound like the most important work in human history. I was hooked. I signed the NDAs, lots of them, without reading the fine print. Another mistake. The facility was remote, buried deep in some unnamed mountain range, accessible only by a private unmarked helicopter. It wasn't a university lab. It was a bunker. Miles of sterile corridors, labs filled with equipment I'd only dreamed of, and a heavy, oppressive silence. The team was intense, brilliant, all of them, but with a kind of haunted, obsessive look in their eyes. We were all chasing something. We just didn't know what. Not really. Not then. Our particular division, they called it Harbinger Protocol. Our goal, Finch explained at our first meeting, was to isolate and amplify precognitive signals to build a receiver for omens of the future. It sounded like science fiction, but the funding, the technology, it was all terrifyingly real. And I, Dr. Eris Thorne, a wide-eyed physicist with a hunger for discovery, had walked straight into the heart of the forbidden. The Herald Protocol. Even the name sent a chill down my spine, though I tried to maintain scientific detachment. Dr. Finch, in his early briefings, was a master of eloquent obfuscation. He spoke of predictive modeling beyond conventional chaos theory, of accessing the underlying informational matrix of the universe. He envisioned a world where catastrophes, natural disasters, pandemics, even major socio-political upheavals could be predicted, mitigated, perhaps even prevented. A noble goal on the surface, but the how, that's where the unease really began to set in. Finch's hypothesis was radical. He believed that major future events didn't just appear, they sent echoes back in time. Not physical echoes, but subtle disturbances in the quantum foam, ripples in probability. These were the harbingers, not entities necessarily, but complex precognitive signals. Our task was to build a receiver sensitive enough to detect these signals, amplify them, and then decode them into actionable warnings. It seemed almost plausible in the way that only truly ambitious and slightly crazy science can. The methodology, however, was where ethically dubious became a colossal understatement. We weren't just building machines. Finch believed that the most sensitive receiver for these quantum echoes was the human mind itself, specifically one pushed to its perceptual limits. So Project Chimera had test subjects. Volunteers, they called them, though I've never seen a consent form that didn't look coerced or signed under duress. They were kept in sensory deprivation chambers, fed a cocktail of psychoactive drugs, and hooked up to a series of arcane-looking devices that hummed with an unsettling energy. A grotesque fusion of cutting-edge neuroscience and something that looked suspiciously like occult paraphernalia that Finch had rediscovered from ancient texts. My role as a physicist was to design the amplification matrix, a contained quantum field that was supposed to resonate with the subjects' minds and boost these faint harbingers. I buried myself in the equations, trying to ignore the muffled screams I sometimes heard from Observation Base C, or the way Subject 003's eyes never seemed to focus on anything in this reality. The other scientists, they were a mixed bag. Some were true believers in Finch's vision. Others, like me, were initially just fascinated by the science, blinded by the resources. But as the weeks and months passed, I saw the price. The sleepless nights, the nervous tics, the way everyone avoided eye contact for too long. We were all walking a tightrope. Finch kept pushing. "We are on the verge of rewriting human destiny," he proclaimed, his eyes shining with messianic fervor. But the destiny we were touching felt wrong. The signals we were beginning to pick up, amplified through the subjects and my matrix, weren't just predicting stock market crashes or earthquakes. They were darker, more personal, filled with a sense of impending individual doom. This wasn't an early warning system. It felt like we were tuning in to the frequency of death itself. Months blurred into an exhausting cycle of calibration, calculation, and countless failed simulations. The subjects in Base C were deteriorating. Some were catatonic. Others were babbling incoherently about threads of light and the shape of time. Finch dismissed it as neurological adjustment. I began to fall asleep in the lab, fueled by coffee and a growing morbid fascination. And then, during a late-night session with Subject 007, an ex-con who had volunteered in exchange for a reduced sentence, we had our first success. The amplification matrix hummed to life, a new resonance I had engineered based on some of Finch's more esoteric theories. Subject 07 began to convulse. His vital signs went haywire. We were about to shut everything down when his eyes snapped open. It wasn't his eyes anymore. They were black as a vacuum, totally empty. And he spoke, not in his usual hoarse voice. It was a chorus, dozens of voices speaking in perfect, chilling unison, overlapping one another. The vessel cracks at 2:32. The iron bird falls from a clear sky. 7 will burn. The water will weep red. And then he simply collapsed. Vital signs returned to normal, if you could call catatonia normal. Finch was elated. A clear sign, a quantifiable herald event. He had his teams analyze the prophecy immediately. I was horrified. The voice, the eyes. This wasn't just data. It felt wrong, sacrilegious. The next day, at precisely 2:32 p.m. local time, 2:32 Zulu, as Finch gleefully pointed out, a chemical tanker truck overturned on I-95, 100 miles away. A small plane, an old Cessna, swerved to avoid it, struck a wing, and crashed into the river below. 7 dead. The river, choked with spilled fuel and chemicals, ran crimson for hours. The vessel cracks, the iron bird falls, 7 will burn, the water will weep red. It was accurate, too accurate. Finch called it a triumph, a proof of concept. He wanted to refine the signal, increase the receptivity of the subjects. That meant more drugs, more sensory deprivation, more exposure to whatever the hell we were channeling. The unintended consequence was not that the experiment didn't work. It was that it worked too well. The Harbinger signals began to come faster. Subject 007 became a conduit for doom. He would predict minor accidents in the lab, a beaker breaking, a power surge, moments before they happened. Then more specific, localized tragedies. A fire in a nearby town. A local politician suffering a sudden fatal aneurysm during a speech, one with whom Finch was particularly irritated. And the nature of the warnings changed. They weren't just predictions. They seemed imbued with a certain satisfaction, a cold amusement. The voices speaking through Subject 007 weren't just reporting the future. They seemed to be savoring it. We weren't receiving omens. We had opened a direct line to something that fed on despair, that reveled in catastrophe. We hadn't built a receiver. We had built a beacon, and it was drawing something terrible our way. A beacon, that's what we had become. And whatever had answered our call, it was hungry for more than just observation. Subject 007 was no longer human. He was a vessel, a grotesque oracle of pain. His predictions became a daily torment, no longer just distant accidents. He began to predict things within Project Chimera. Dr. Anya Sharma, our chief biologist, a brilliant woman. 007 chuckled one morning, his voice a chorus of cracked whispers, and said, "The good doctor will find your samples agitated. Hungry, too. She shouldn't open C4. Anya, ever the scientist, dismissed it. She went to Lab C4 to check her viral cultures. We heard the alarms first, then the screams. The cultures had mutated. They had become aggressive, airborne. They consumed her. We found only his lab coat and an unidentifiable, rapidly spreading mold. Finch, damn him, called it an unforeseen variable, but also fascinating data on the localized influence of the Herald. 07's warnings became more targeted, more malicious. He would name a technician and predict a critical system failure they would be working on. Hours later, that technician would be found dead, electrocuted, or trapped in some horrific machinery malfunction. It was as if the entity speaking through him was causing these events, not just predicting them. Or maybe it was showing us the future it wanted. The facility itself began to fall apart. Lights exploded. Temperatures plummeted in one corridor and skyrocketed in another. The very architecture seemed to change when you weren't looking. Doors led to different rooms. Hallways became endless loops. The other employees were breaking down. Dr. Ramirez, our quantum engineer, had begun scribbling complex equations on the walls, muttering about time incursions and the ancients. He'd gone into the reactor core one day. There wasn't much left to salvage. And Subject 007, he'd just sit in his chamber, that horrible chorus of voices sometimes laughing, sometimes singing in a language that felt like razors in my ears. He was getting stronger. The darkness in his eyes seemed to spread, leak into the room. The air around him shimmered. He was no longer just a conduit. He was becoming a portal. Finch, blinded by his God complex, saw only progress. "We are witnessing the birth of a new understanding," he raved. I saw only the end, our end. The experiment wasn't just a failure. It was a betrayal of everything science was supposed to be.
We hadn't sought to understand the future. We had sold our souls for a glimpse of him, and in doing so, we had invited something ancient and ravenous to our doorstep. I began to make my own plans, not for discovery, for escape, because I knew with a chilling certainty that the Herald experiment was not just predicting doom, it was doom, and it was spreading. It happened fast, too fast. One moment, Finch was adjusting a console near Subject 007's chamber, muttering about stabilizing the resonance field. The next, the chamber imploded. Not an outward explosion, but an inward one, like a vacuum. Then, a shock wave of something, not sound, not light, pure abnormality. It hit us like a physical blow. Alarms blared. The entire facility went into lockdown. Red lights painted everything blood. The voices, the chorus of voices that was Subject 007. It wasn't just his voice anymore. It was everywhere, echoing from the PA system, whispering from every ventilation duct, resonating in my own skull. The portal is open. The Herald is free. Finch, he was just standing there amidst the chaos, staring at the breach, a horrible, ecstatic smile on his face. "Beautiful," he whispered. "It's beautiful." He was mad. They were all mad, or changed. I saw Dr. Chen, her eyes as empty and black as Test Subject 007's, crawling across the ceiling. I didn't wait. My escape plan was lame. A maintenance tunnel I'd found in an old schematic, one that supposedly led to an emergency exit miles away. I grabbed my research data, the only evidence of this nightmare, and ran. It was behind me. I could hear it, or them, the change team, or the Herald himself. I don't know. I didn't look back. The tunnel was collapsing behind me. Pipes burst. The air grew thick, unbreathable. I just kept running, fueled by pure animal terror. The flash drive with the data clutched in my hand like a holy relic. This story, this warning, had to come out. The exit was rusty. I threw my shoulder against it over and over. Behind me, the sounds grew closer. A chilling, multifaceted laugh echoed through the tunnel. I gave one last desperate push. The door groaned and opened. Just a crack. Enough. I squeezed through into the pre-dawn gloom of the mountainside and didn't stop running until the sun was a burning white eye in the sky and the sounds of that cursed facility were miles behind me. Or so I hoped.
I don't know if they're still looking for me. The Chimera Project, or that thing, the Herald. The data I have, it's a fragment, but it's enough. Enough to warn you. They wanted to predict the future. Instead, they tore a hole in reality. It's out there. It's listening. And their warnings always come true. Don't look for the signs. Don't try to understand. Just pray you're not part of his next prediction. His next prediction. Dr. Thorne has hung up, or been hung up on. His message, however, echoes in the stillness of this early morning at 4:35. The Harbinger experiment is a grim reminder. There are doors science should never open, futures best left unforeseen, and knowledge that exacts a terrible price. At Urban Echoes, we are the curators of these forbidden echoes. We collect the journals of scientists who went too far, the corrupted data from experiments that failed catastrophically, the final warnings of those who saw what lurks behind the veil of reality. Want to investigate other protocols that defied logic and sanity? Discover what other harbingers were contacted, created, or unleashed in the shadows of human ambition. Peruse these other classified files. They are lessons etched in fear, failure, and sometimes eternal silence.
If you seek to understand the consequences of playing God, if you want access to reports the world would rather forget, and if you have the courage to face the echoes of what should not be known, sign up. Join the chroniclers of urban echoes. We archive the cries of science, so that, perhaps, they need not be repeated. Sleep well if the knowledge you gain tonight allows it, and question any invitation to change the world. Some futures are better left unseen.